Hello YouTube. This is about a rarely mentioned global climate cataclysm of the 6th century AD. The sun has given a sign, the like of which has never been seen and which has never been reported. The sun darkened, and its darkness lasted for 18 months. Every day it shone for about 4 hours, and yet this light was only a faint shadow. Everyone thought that the sun would never return its full light again. This is from the Historiae Ecclesiasticae. Between 535 and 536 years, a series of major global climate events occurred, which can be easily described as a global cataclysm with catastrophic consequences. The above excerpt is taken from the writings of the historian and authoritative spiritual leader of the 6th century, John of Ephesus, in his historical work, Church Histories. John of Ephesus is not the only one who mentions this event. Procopius lived between 500 and 565 AD. He was a scholar of late antiquity and one of the main historians of the 6th century. He also mentions the strange behavior of the sun and believes that this is a bad sign and the beginning of bad events. During this year, the most terrible event happened, for the sun emitted its light without brightness, and it seemed very similar to the sun in an eclipse, because the rays that it shed were unclear. It was in the history of wars, the Vandal War. And we have another mention from a 6th century writer, Zacharias of Maitillini, who is the author of a chronicle containing a section mentioning the dark sun in the period in the years 535 to 536 AD. The sun began to darken during the day, and the moon at night, and the ocean raged from the waves from March 24 this year to June 24 next year. And since the winter was harsh, so much so that birds died from a large and unprecedented amount of snow. It was a disaster among people from evil deeds. It was in Zacharias of Maitillini, Chronicle 9.9 and 10.1. These three passages are just an illustrative example of numerous stories from around the world written in the same time period. In all cases, the sun was described as dimming and losing its light. Many also described that it acquires a bluish color. A similar effect was observed with the moon. It was no longer so bright. The decrease in light has led to a decrease in heat on the planet. The lack of rains and a very long winter has led to crop failure, the death of birds and other wild animals. As Zacharias of Maitillini wrote, famine and plagues strike many areas, and there was a huge number of deaths. You wake up on a dark, dreary, gloomy Monday morning for the 547th day in a row. Just 18 months before that, you were a hard-working farmer preparing for the next harvest season. But then the sky darkened. In Scandinavia and in the Baltic states, many settlements were abandoned in the 6th century. In some regions, about 75% or more died out. On the island of Åland, all 1,300 houses were abandoned. Danish archaeologist Morten Agsbøl sees a connection between the number of treasure finds dating from the first half of the 6th century and the climatic catastrophe of the year 536. Pagans used protective charms, amulets, they sacrificed valuable objects to the gods in the hope that the darkening would end and the weak sun would shine brightly again. Many people left their homes and buried their valuables, hoping to return one day. During this period, the decline of Teotihuacan, the largest city in Central America and one of the largest cities in the world of this era, that's when it began. Probably the reason for the decline of Teotihuacan was famine, which arose as a result of a drought associated with climate change. The eruption of the Ilopango volcano in 539, it would have led to social upheaval in some parts of Central America, with signs of civil unrest and famine. Large regions of today's El Salvador and southwestern Guatemala were buried under a layer of ash, and there was a demographic collapse. Italy was devastated by the Gothic Wars from 535 to 552, and then in 562. Famine during the siege of Rome in the years 537-538 stopped the attacking Ostgoths and forced them to retreat in March of 537. The official representative of the Eastern Roman Empire, Johannes Lidos, wrote down from Constantinople that the sun had been darkened for almost a year and the harvest was destroyed. This was the late antique period Little Ice Age. From the beginning of 535 to basically 537, the sky remained dark. In most of Eastern Europe and Asia, spring turned into summer and autumn into winter without a single sunny day. Like a curtain over the sun, millions of people in the most densely populated countries of the world squinted from the dim light, inhaling the suffocating thick air and losing almost all the crops they had hoped for. This is not a plot from a movie about some post-apocalypse. This is a harsh reality for millions of people who had experienced this literally dark time, or some historians say, the worst year for life. For the sun has been emitting its light without brightness like the moon throughout this year, and it seemed extremely similar to the sun in an eclipse, because the rays it shed were neither clear nor such as in the habit of shedding is the gloomy account of Procopius, the outstanding scientist who became the main Byzantine historian of the 6th century. And since that time, people have not suffered from war, nor from pestilence, nor from anything else leading to death. He's trying to compare it to previous times. Some 1500 years later, Harvard University medieval historian Michael McCormick came to an equally grim conclusion, not only about the year 536, but also about the terrible decade that followed that terrible year. For people living in Europe in 536, it was the beginning of one of the worst periods for life, if not the worst year. According to McCormick, all this was caused by rapid and abrupt climate change. In the spring of 536, the eruption of the volcano caused the late antique Little Ice Age. Its consequences, as well as subsequent eruptions in 540 and 547, were devastating. Aerosols formed as a result of large volcanic eruptions, blocked solar radiation, reduced solar heating of the Earth's surface, and a climate analysis by the University of Cambridge in the UK, conducted on 3 rings, shows that the average summer temperature decreased by 1.5 to 2.5 degrees Celsius across Eurasia. This is 2.7 to 4.5 degrees Fahrenheit colder due to the heavy smoke left after the eruption. According to numerous historical witnesses, the sky remained dark for 18 months, which led to the onset of a dark year of unrest, which brought that year of 536 the dubious fame. Blocked sunlight had seriously affected weather conditions, leading to summer snowfalls in China and the lowest temperatures in more than 2,300 years, according to recorded historical evidence and analysis of climate reconstruction. In the Middle East, China, and Europe, thick fog was an inescapable daily nightmare, and widespread agricultural problems in Ireland led to a grain crop failure in the years 536 to 539 AD, according to the Gallic Irish Annals. Much of the scientists' understanding of the consequences of the Icelandic volcano eruption was obtained during the historic Ice Core project, a partnership between the University of Maine and Harvard University, which McCormick led with Professor Paul Majewski of the Climate Change Institute. Using ice core samples from Iceland, the team compiled an archaeological chronology to determine exactly when and where the initial volcanic eruption occurred in Iceland. Its consequences were widespread and deadly. Ancient eyewitnesses report that the sun stopped shining brightly for about 14 to 18 months, McCormick said. The result was several years of crop failures, famine, which caused migrations and unrest throughout Eurasia. Although the outbreak of bubonic plague in the 6th century may have been remembered less than the reappearance of this disease in the 14th century, which became known as the Black Death, the pandemic of the 6th century nevertheless caused the destruction of at least a third of the population of Eastern Roman Empire, which led to its collapse. Byzantium was no more. Dubbed the Justinian Pandemic or the Justinian Plague, the disease spread through the Roman Egypt and then infected the rest of the world over the next 200 years. According to McCormick, ancient DNA showed the causative agent of the disease was the Yersinia pestis, bubonic plague, a disease of rats and other rodents that spread to humans. According to McCormick, as a result of volcanic eruptions that changed the climate and the gloomy year of 536, the situation was fatally favorable for the plague to sow chaos. It seems likely that, for example, food shortages caused by a sudden cold snap in many parts of Eurasia weakened the population and made it more susceptible to the pathogen. According to him, the famine almost certainly led to a mass migration of people who probably brought the disease with them. In China and Japan, this event was also recorded in great detail. Massive droughts and thousands of deaths. There was not enough water for people and land. Hundreds of thousands of square kilometers of land have become barren. In the Bei-Shi Chronicles, the official history of the northern dynasties, it is mentioned that in 536, 80% of the population died in the Xi'an province, and the survivors ate corpses to survive. The catastrophic event hit Korea, Americas, Europe, Africa, and Australia. Although written evidence does not exist for all countries, archaeological and geological data have revealed evidence of climate change. For example, studies conducted on tree trunks have shown that the year 536 AD was the coldest in the last 1500 years. The important question in all of this is, why did it happen? Although there are no definite answers, one of the theories put forward is that there was an impact of a large asteroid or a comet that fell into the sea. If it had fallen on land, a crater would have remained. Well, geologist Dallas Abbott is one of the proponents of this point of view, I should say hypothesis, and bases his point of view on the evidence he discovered while studying ice cores from Greenland. However, this does not explain the dim light of the sun, and during this period there were no tsunamis that could have occurred if an asteroid had fallen into the ocean. Compared to the Tunguska event of 1908, the asteroid or comet that caused climate changes since 536 should have been many times larger. The size of the asteroid was supposed to be about 500 meters. It was supposed to explode at an altitude of 20 kilometers. Another study conducted since the years 2000s linked climate change to the possible impact of several comet fragments or a combination of volcanic eruption and a meteorite. The theory of impact of small cosmic bodies is confirmed by the findings of tiny spheres in the Greenland ice, which consists of condensate of evaporated rock materials. A double crater discovered in 2006 by the Holocene Task Force research team in the Gulf of Carpentaria of the coast of Australia, and a smaller crater in the North Sea of the coast of Norway are being considered as possible collision sites. The influence of a small body as the main cause of the climatic anomaly is actually considered to be unlikely. Another hypothesis put forward is a giant volcanic eruption. Dust released into the atmosphere could cause dim light. One of the candidates is the Krakatoa Volcano, located between the islands of Java and Sumatra in Indonesia. Indeed, the Book of Ancient Kings, or Pustaka Raja Purva, written in 1869, describes an ancient volcano. There was a violent shaking of the earth, complete darkness, thunder, and light. Then a violent wind rose with torrential rain, and a deadly storm overshadowed the whole world. When the water subsided, it became clear that the island of Java split into two parts, resulting in the formation of the island of Sumatra. However, this manuscript dates back to 416 AD, not 535 AD. However, the fact that it was written in the 19th century may explain the inaccuracies in the indication of time. Whether the answer will be ever found is unknown. It is unknown whether scientists continue to investigate this event at all. One feature of this global cataclysm is that it's a relatively little known event. Majewski, a glaciologist at the University of Maine, also took an active part in the Historical Ice Project and told the Science magazine that his team was able to analyze 2,000 years of historical natural disasters taken from the 72-meter drilling in Iceland, which allowed researchers to obtain a historical chronology of element levels. So I applaud the scientists who do not ignore that event. Using a laser to carve 120 micron chunks of ice from the core, scientists were able to analyze the jumps and drops in the level of elements at various points in history to compare them with catastrophes that helped better piece together our understanding of what shaped the world we live in today. Scientists by the last name Kurbatov concluded that a completely catastrophic combination of winds and weather in 536 AD must have sent a plume through Europe and into Asia, creating a cold haze when volcanic fog rolled through. Okay, so remember the statement about the fog present everywhere. Other researchers also believe that the Icelandic eruption of 536 threw out thick ash that spread throughout the northern hemisphere, releasing large numbers of sulfides into the atmosphere, according to that 2015 article in the Smithsonian Magazine. In addition to this eruption, other studies conducted recently suggest that more than one volcano could be responsible for the tragedies in that period. Well, another significant explosion, according to the researchers, was one of the strongest eruptions in the last 10,000 years, comparable only to the eruption of Mount Tambora in 1815. Well, the eruption of the Tambora volcano also led to an equally gloomy year, as most of 1816 was also shrouded in darkness, which led to unprecedented low temperatures and hundreds of thousands of deaths from the eruption and starvation due to the crop failure of the season. This period of time is known as the year without summer. In the United States, Snow fell in June in New York and Maine, and several frost and ice storms were observed in this region in July. In the 7th century, about 5,000 miles from Iceland in Central America, another volcano, in the 6th century, another volcano erupted, changing history, and the volcanic explosion was more than 100 times stronger than the eruption of Mount St. Helens in 1980. That's according to researcher Robert Dahl. When he spoke to National Geographic, a group of researchers published a study in the journal Quaternary Science Reviews, placing the eruption site in central El Salvador from the dormant Ilopango volcano. Today there is a 28 square mile lake in the abandoned volcanic caldera. This is the largest eruption in Central America that people have ever witnessed, according to the geologist Dahl at the California Lutheran University. The importance of this event is even greater, both in how the Maya overcame it and in how it impacted what happened afterwards. It is believed that a couple of cataclysmic eruptions together provoked the following decades of disease, famine, and tragedy. Well, I already talked about Andrei Kurbatov, the Russian scientist, and his colleague Laura Hartman, a student. They took an ice sample in the spring of dating to spring of 536, and they found microscopic particles of volcanic glass that closely match glass particles previously found in lakes in Europe and in an ice core sample taken from Greenland. Kurbatov concluded that a completely catastrophic combination of winds, fog, sent a plume through Europe and into Asia, as I said. Well, using historical dating techniques such as three-ring analysis and stable carbon isotope recordings, the researchers presented a model to imagine how cruel people's lives were at the time. According to them, the dust curtain reduced the normal level of solar radiation and thereby ruined long-term harvests, and also contributed to surprisingly simultaneous outbreaks of hunger, as a result of which people experienced prolonged shortage of vitamin D, which worsened health and quality of life in those years of darkness. So McCormick said that as more natural climate records and reconstructions of late antique period Little Ice Age are studied, scientists will be able to better understand how this dust curtain radically changed the weather in different parts of northern hemisphere. For example, the Arabian Peninsula could become a little less dry, while north of the Mediterranean the effects seem more dramatic and negative, he said. Until now, most of the natural climate records on the basis of which late antique period Little Ice Age was reconstructed relate to Eurasia and North America, that is more, northern latitudes. Even if it's hard to believe, given that over the past 100 years there have been several world wars and many devastating pandemics, McCormick says that this terrifying period of history is confirmed by witness accounts, and it was much worse. So what happened in the 6th century was much worse than what the Earth has experienced through the 20th century and beginning of the 21st century. It was a pretty drastic change. It happened overnight. The ancient witnesses really saw something. They were not hysterical and did not imagine the end of the world. It really happened. Why is this climate event not really being studied in schools? Why are there more studies devoted to this event? Because in the history of our planet, I'm sure we had identical events tied to volcanic eruptions. Well, maybe because it reminds us of our fragility as human beings, and that no matter how powerful and advanced humanity may become, we still remain at the mercy of nature. The cold and freezing climate is very dangerous, because people die of starvation and famine when the land freezes. Okay? You don't hear much about it, but this is what happens. So the event was part of humanity's history. Let's hope it's not repeated. And let's hope our governments learn something from this too. Thank you for your attention. If you can support my work, my research, you will find the links in the description to this channel. Please subscribe to my channel, and please tell others about it and like it. I appreciate it.